Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the channel. I'm Brian Lusk. Thank you for being patient with me. I didn't realize I'd gone about a minute and a half after the turn of the hour here. So let's go ahead and get right into things. Thank you again for joining me. Let's get started right here. And we're going to start off with a fire at this Platon Research Institute in the Moscow region of Russia. Now, the fire's engulfed, as I recall, it's actually more like 4,000 square meters at this point of the facility, and it's a pretty impressive bit of stuff going up in smoke there. Now, normally I would think, okay, something else is on fire in Russia, no big deal, that we'd call that any day that ends with a Y. But it turns out that this is actually a pretty vital war material plant. As Igor Sushko states, they are developing radar jamming technology for the Russian military, although he did add that at least 8 people were dead. And Jason J. Smart points out that this institute develops electronics, semiconductor lasers, screens, and more for the Russian Ministry of Defense. So this plant going up in smoke is a pretty big blow to Russia. They are already having trouble keeping their vital electronics made and placed into things like missiles and aircraft. So having even more of that slowed down is going to be an issue for them. Hi, Jerry. Glad to have you on board. Thank you for joining me tonight. Always glad to have you here. But that's not the only thing that's been going on in Russia. We're going to take a brief trip over to Dagestan, which is right here on the map. Let me go ahead and pull out a little bit so you can get a little bit of scope and scale here. And bear with me one moment. I'm going to quickly do something here. Book. Dunk. Dunk. We're looking at this region right here, now that I've got my stuff all set up here. And just for clarification, Ukraine is away over here. So we're not exactly talking right as part of the front lines. And it's not really even related to Ukraine at this particular moment. So let me show you what's going on. We're going to be looking particularly at Makachkala up here and Derbent right here, because the Islamic State Northern Caucasus branch, Wilayat Kavkaz, likely conducted a complex and coordinated attack against churches, synagogues, and law enforcement structures in the Republic of Dagestan on June 23rd. There is a lot of stuff that is going on here and a lot of aspects. And let me tell you, I have been watching this unfold and trying to tease out exactly what's going on. And to a certain extent, this may have started more as a coup than necessarily a terrorist attack. So let's go ahead and keep going. Russian Spetsnaz ended up storming a church that was occupied with some gunmen who had barricaded themselves inside with hostages. By the time, by the way, this attack carried out for probably 12 or more hours before Russian Spetsnaz were able to actually respond to the scene. Law enforcement didn't actually do much of anything to stop it, but there was some firefights that happened in the town. I'm going to go ahead and move this towards the end because that's important later. The Russian authorities seemed to lose control of the situation as armed gunmen killed cops and destroyed buildings, with the situation continuing to escalate. But what makes this more interesting is the identities of the people they're now seeing that were involved. For instance, one of the insurgents that was killed by the Russian Spetsnaz was reportedly an MMA fighter, Gadzmarad Kagarov, and there are even others that were even more important. Let me move this down a little bit here. I want to find the right information here. Not that one. Okay, there we go. Apparently, this insurgency is what Igor Sushko calls it, was led by a local politician's sons. And these two sons, and apparently a nephew of this guy, Omarov, I believe is the correct name, were leading this group of Islamic militants effectively in this attack. There's video all over the place about this. I'm not going to be publishing any of it here, but they were basically the individuals that were involved in the attack were eventually shot dead by security forces. A total of 24 people reportedly died during the attacks, along with 15 police officers, 4 civilians, a priest, and 5 of the militants. So we're still getting some of the information out of this. So understand that I'm teasing out the best information I can, even though this took place yesterday. There's still things that are being revealed as we go through. The head of the Sargo-Kalinsky district of Dagestan was fired from his job, with his sons, who are suspected of participating in the attacks. Magomed Umarov was detained, fired, and expelled from the United Russia, which is Vladimir Putin's political party. Umarov himself stated that he has not communicated with his sons for several years. As he says, I will not comment on some things that can be commented on, taking into account the degree of his guilt or participation in the tragedy that occurred. This is the task of the investigative authorities. So overall, we're looking at a politician with a couple of sons and a nephew, later revealed, that went just whole hog on this attack that took place. Now, Umarov himself was taken away in a car. That car was shot up during something that happened there. I believe it was shot up by Russian authorities. I do not know if Umarov actually managed to survive that attack or anything like that. But at the time that he was in custody, the car that he was in, being transported in, was shot up. By the way, that was Magomed Umarov right there. Apparently, Putin tried to write some addresses on this, but the situation was changing so much he had to rewrite it 4 times. But overall, we still end up with a true failure by Russia's FSB, or secret police, to properly monitor what's going on in various parts of their country. So overall, this is going to be pretty crazy. The Russians have already tried to pin the blame on Ukraine for this attack. By the way, Lucille, I do see you there. Glad to have you as well. Thanks for joining. They've already tried to place an emphasis on Ukraine being behind the attack, but they have not been able to identify any actual link between Ukraine and what happened in Dagestan. Magomed Umarov himself was deleted from the United Russia website, really indicating that he has been truly purged from the party. Anton Herashchenko comes up with the best summary of the situation I've been able to find, and a step-by-step right through all of the events that they know about. I'm just going to link it there because this is more information than I can effectively summarize for this moment. But overall, attacks on synagogues and churches, various officials and law enforcement officers were killed in these attacks, and 6 shooters were actually killed during the anti-terrorism operation. My understanding at this point is that they've actually ended their anti-terrorism regime over there, that things are pretty much secure at this point. But still not much to really go on to put our fingers into and get the meat of what's going on. Hi, Al. Glad to have you here as well. Always glad to see you. Dagestani terrorists were apparently adherents of a Salafi national separatist movement that basically focuses on calling Russia basically a colonial power, and saying that they're oppressors and that they're trying to establish an Islamic state there. So overall, things are, like I said, just a little bit questionable and in flux. The long story short, though, is that it appears to have been an Islamic State inspired, if not if not supported, attack on this Dagestan region of Russia. course, the Russians, this is an entirely different bit. There was a series of ATACMS strikes on Crimea, and one of those strikes, well, they claim to have intercepted the missile incoming with the remains of a cluster munition falling on a nearby beach that was less than 2 kilometers from a military target, with multiple civilians having reported to have been perished in the attack. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. For one thing, we've got a video of the consequences of this ATACMS strike. You can see there's burning going on in the background behind these trees and bushes, but they don't show the facility itself. The Russian Ministry of Defense has put out a statement. This is actually the Institute for the Study of War talking about it. Has accused Ukrainian forces of conducting this short-range ATACMS strike against occupied Sevastopol on June 23rd. They claim that they intercepted all 5 of the ATACMS missiles. Of course, Ukraine says they launched 8, and Ukraine also says they launched them in 2 waves separated by 12 hours. So take your pick on which version you want to believe, but since there's burning Russian buildings, I think we know which one to give a little more credence to. The attack was, they intercepted some of these missiles, they claim, with their air defense systems, which, by the way, it sounds like the brand spanking new S-500 was nearby and was unable to actually stop this attack. So what did they hit? Well, they hit Russia's space tracking and communications center in occupied Crimea. This is where they control their spy satellites. This is where they control their GLONASS system. This is also how they basically receive information from their spy satellite networks and things like that. So this is a vital coordination factor and intelligence gathering facility for Russia. This is from the beach part of the attack here. This is showing remains of what appears to be a 9M330 air defense missile that's launched by the Russian Tor M2 platform. This Igor Sushko says that this shows that it wasn't an ATACMS strike. Unfortunately, both can be true. So just because if an air defense missile like this, if it went off course, could have been destroyed automatically by the system and have the debris fall on an occupied territory, occupied area, such as a civilian beach, but it could also have intercepted an ATACMS missile and therefore scattered the cluster munitions all over this area. By the way, here's a picture of some of the of a beach with one of the military facilities right above it. So we're not talking a huge separation here. The Russians are allowing their populace to vacation and party right outside their military facilities that will be under attack. So let's talk about the damage. This is the 40th separate command and measuring complex that was attacked, with 29 vehicles, 16 vehicles near Officer Corps, suggesting that this main primary target was actually the experienced officers who were working and living there. There's also a Kursuka electronic warfare system used to protect these command posts and other key facilities. And as I mentioned, the Russian S-500 system was very close nearby, may have actually been part of launching the intercept. The thing is, though, that it obviously was not able to protect its target, meaning that Russia's vaunted, latest, newest, toppest end air defense system is still vulnerable to American missiles from the 80s and 90s. Or as I say, our 40-year-old tech. I'm going to go ahead and drop the link to this article right here because it is an interesting read if you have a little bit more time. Traces of burnout are visible in the field between the village and the military unit and on the military facility itself. And it was on the field that the Krashuka electronic warfare complex was located. That was obviously destroyed in the explosion. Anton Herischenko gives us a little bit of context as to what this facility was used for, including reconnaissance and monitoring, satellite surveillance, and information gathering systems. There's also passive radar reconnaissance and active radar for maritime reconnaissance. A lot of things that were going on with this facility, making it a vital structure to be destroyed by Ukrainian forces. Now, this was not just an old facility either. Since the occupation of Crimea, the facility has gotten multiple new antenna installations, and you can see that's been expanded quite considerably from its original structures. And of course, in response, the Russians have put up a sign. The sign says, "Swimming is prohibited, danger zone." The Russian military and rescuers are searching for explosive objects on the shore and in coastal waters. Now, General Budanov, the enigmatic intelligence chief for Ukraine, gave an interview the other day. And here are some things that he said about Crimea and a few other things. He did state that there was no point in peace talks until they have returned what was occupied, because if they don't return all of the territory, it's just going to mean the war will continue forever. About Crimea, he said that there has not been a single warship left in the Black Sea for a while. They're trapped near the port of Novorossiysk. They also want to make sure that the remnants of the fleet will be pushed back into the Russian Federation. Those who claim that ATACMS are not powerful enough to destroy the Kerch Bridge are mistaken. The only question is the quantity available to use. And the attacks they've been carrying out on the Russian territory, where they've been striking Russian soldiers and equipment with Western-provided weapons, or the drones that have been striking things like oil facilities, these all are affecting the morale of the average Russian. Then he talked about the Russian offensive, specifically the one in Kharkiv. The good news is that there will be no Armageddon. The bad news is that the situation is quite complicated. It will remain like this for at least a month. They'll also do everything possible to prevent the occupation in the east, where Donbass is. On weapons and ammunition supplies being delivered, deliveries are happening faster than a few months ago, but Ukraine's needs are very high, so it was strategically important for us to resume supplies. The question remains about volumes. Then they talked about technology and the attacks on the Russian territory. Technology will be of great importance in this war, so that we do not fight to the war to the last citizen. While the war is being waged on our territory, it will not affect Russia. That is why in the spring of 2022, we began to conduct operations on Russian territory. And we will go further the more resources we have for this. Russia will begin to feel it. The U.S. restrictions to a 100-kilometer strike zone is not fair game, and the enemy's refinery is a legitimate military target. The current U.S. authorization will make our life easier, he said, but if there is permission to use American weapons to the full operational depth that we can achieve, it'll be much easier than that. Then he talked about nuclear blackmail. One of the repeated themes we're seeing from Russia is this repeated threats to nuke everybody that does so much as stub a Russian toenail. And the thing is that if we, the West, allow even one singular nuclear threat to work, there will be no end to nuclear threats. And there will be no end to people seeking out nuclear weapons, because the nuclear weapons means they get what they want. So we cannot allow nuclear threats to stop us from doing the right thing. Because the first one that works ends the effectiveness of mutually assured destruction. So let me talk about what he said about it. I know the real characteristics of Russian nuclear weapons. We do not have large concentrations of troops for which such nuclear weapons would be appropriate, and holes can be punched in our defense lines using conventional means of warfare. The use of nuclear weapons will lead to great political risks for Putin. His red lines in Crimea have already been crossed several times and nothing happened. If there is a chance to convince Putin that he cannot win, it might be to make Moscow's control of Crimea impossible. So that's what Budanov had to say. Of course, he added on, in the end, I believe in the United States, and that we will reach victory together. Good interview from Budanov. In fact, I believe they've got the full interview linked in this post here, so I'll go ahead and drop it in for you guys to check out at your leisure. Let's move on to the news out of Ukraine. Big news that came up is the Lieutenant General Yuri Sodol. Yeah, Yuri Sodol has been relieved of command and replaces the commander of the Joint Forces. He's been replaced with Brigadier General Andrei Natov. Now, this seems a bit out of the blue for those of us who are not plugged into what's going on. However, there was a report of a general that was, shall we say, commanding in a way that resulted in extremely high losses of Ukrainian forces. Now, the general was never identified in that complaint. However, it's indicated, or at least implied, that that General Sodol might be that very general. And by pulling him off the front lines, it indicates he is under significant investigation for his actions during the war. In other news related to Ukraine here, out of 20,000 officially registered children abducted by Russia, 800 have been returned to Ukraine. That means there's a lot more work to do. And there was a major attack on Odessa, in particular on a warehouse. 60 people were inside. However, all of them are reportedly alive. The warehouse itself was effectively nearly destroyed. But as Anton Herashchenko reports from Tavria V Press Service, there was never any ammunition, weapons, or shells in the warehouse. Groceries, food, and non-food products were stored there. Everything necessary for the comfortable daily life of civilian Ukrainians. But even in the moment with the loss of this warehouse, the care continued. And if you pay close attention, you'll see a dog in a box in this video. They're reviewing all of it. Let me back up here. The dog in the box is also being cared for his injuries. And by being covered up, it's keeping him from panicking during all the things that are going on. So even in this type of emergency, the Ukrainians still take care of the less fortunate pets with what resources they can. Now let's go ahead and move into the news out of Russia itself. We already talked about Dagestan, and there's a lot more other things going on. One of the things that kind of caught my eye was this intelligence update from the UK, talking about the owner of the Russian nationalist TV channel, Zarograd. He sponsors this kind of nationalist student organization movement called the Fraternity of the Academics. It has cells in various universities, Russian universities, and adheres to a militantly imperialist outlook. They believe the 21st century is a potential for a golden century of Russian culture with Russian ideological dominance on a global scale. They have organized military training and some of these members have gone to fight in Ukraine. This is basically showing that there are organizations that believe that Russia is not nasty enough. I mean, and long story short on that, they want Russia to be even nastier than they are now so they can dominate Ukraine and dominate the world. The Russia-North Korea Defense Pact could strain the Kremlin's relations with China, according to former Spanish Foreign Affairs Minister Ana Palacio. Now, she wrote an op-ed on the situation and states that this could result in the disruption of Chinese and Russian relations. I'm not convinced. I think that there's a lot of other pressures going on, and I don't think the North Korea situation is sufficiently on China's radar. But I thought that the information was interesting because there are people that obviously have more analysis capabilities on this than I do. My gut feel at this point is that the relationship between North Korea and Russia doesn't really change much on the relationship between China and Russia. But there could be aspects I don't see and don't understand. So this is interesting, and I'm going to just kind of link this article here. Today is apparently link day. So for you guys to check out this article by Ana Palacio. Russian Telegram channels reported that Ukrainian armed forces used HIMARS systems to attack the Kursk region for the first time and hit an FSB building, with one FSB employee injured and 2 vehicles damaged. Over in the Luhansk People's Republic, an anti-war priest has been disappeared. He left a message on his Telegram channel saying that he was put in an ambulance and he was beaten and he was locked up with the police and wasn't sure he would survive. He was apparently already in pretty bad condition with tremors and a chest cough. But this is what happens to people who don't support Russia's war on the Russian side. They get disappeared. President Zelensky reported that more than 30 Russian refineries, terminals, and oil depots have been affected by Ukrainian attacks. And as he said, I would say a little cockily, for our drones, 1,500 kilometers is not a problem. Vladimir Putin, though, is always complaining these days, it seems. He's either constantly duped by evil Western powers, or even after his return from North Korea, he declares that Russia is on its own. And Anton Herashchenko says, or asks, I should say, was his visit to North Korea not as successful as he wanted it to be after all? And that's the situation out of Russia itself right now. Let's go ahead and move on to the international front. We do have word that another $150 million aid package is expected to be announced from the U.S. I have not seen further details, but it seems like they've got these steady packages going on a regular basis. A 14th package of sanctions on Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine has been announced by the EU Council, which blacklists 69 additional individuals and 47 entities. Word is as soon as they finished this package, they immediately started work on package number 15. Then there's Serbia. I wish I could pick up Serbia and just kind of shake them a little bit to get them to make up their minds. But they're still increasing their ammunition sales to the West, which indirectly supports Ukraine's defense. Now, my gut feel on Serbia is that as long as the checks cash and as long as the dollars are green, they're more than happy to sell to the highest bidder. And the fact that they are supporting, well, not supporting, but selling to Western powers indicates, I think, that they're more interested in the almighty dollar than necessarily supporting Russia, which has been their stated position before. President Vucic acknowledged this $800 million figure, framing it as a business opportunity crucial for Serbia's economic revival. That really is all about them Benjamins. More and more CB-90 assault ships are being transferred to Ukraine, this time from the Netherlands and Sweden, who have already supplied Ukraine with a very significant amount. Akhmetov's Steel Front donated CB-90 assault ships to Ukraine's GUR, and the GUR servicemen mentioned the word Crimea during the handover. Might give you a little hint about where we might see these next. New trade data reveals increased North Korean munitions transfers to Russia. This is internal Russian trade data obtained by the Washington Post that indicates that Russia may have received 1.6 million artillery shells from North Korea over the course of 6 months. Now, my understanding is that whenever they're firing the North Korean ammunition, they get a really long rope and stand as far away from the artillery piece as they can before they pull the rope. So there are quality issues with the North Korean ammunition. Now, the Russian propaganda channels have been rumbling about something really exciting happening in the Black Sea, and they've hinted that they may have brought down an American drone. The Americans have said, we've had no reports of any problems out of the Black Sea. And usually they run those with their transponder on, so the loss of one would show up quite obviously when its transponder suddenly stopped working. But the Russian side seems to believe that they may have dropped one of these Reaper drones or reconnaissance drones that the Americans have been flying around. In the vein of the bite of sanctions taking hold, the Russian subsidiary of Bank of China has suspended settlements with the Russian Federation due to U.S. sanctions. They will no longer deal in payments with. Sorry, let me back that up. The Bank of China, the Russian, will deal with payments in yuan between Russia and China, but they've suspended transactions with Russian banks from the U.S. sanctions list. They will continue to work with other partners, though. Bank of China accounted for a significant part of the payment traffic between Russia and China. So blocking some of those companies means that it's going to be harder to get some of those dollars through, or rubles, or yuan, or whatever they want to say. Moving outside of the war in Ukraine for just a moment, but I continue to believe that these are all connected at this point. Israel and the United... Let's try that again in English. Israel and the United States have conducted backdoor diplomacy to get Hezbollah to move north of the Litani River in Lebanon to reduce the threat and allow tens of thousands of displaced Israelis to return to their homes in northern Israel. War is very possible as Hezbollah won't budge. And this is a kind of an ongoing situation here. Israel has said they're going to start a military operation into Lebanon to push Hezbollah back behind the Litani River. Now, Hezbollah has a tenuous relationship with the official governments of Lebanon. They have a much larger military presence than the government of Lebanon. So it's not exactly going to be a cakewalk for Israel to do this. The backdoor diplomacy, I don't see working because we are working with primarily ideologues here, people whose ideology is what's motivating them in the first place. So I'm not surprised it didn't make any difference. That could change, but interesting nonetheless. Hi, Robbie. Glad to have you on board. Always glad to see you as well. And also outside of the Ukraine area here, unrest has reignited and continued overnight in New Caledonia after French security forces carried out the covert extradition of pro-independence leaders. Protests may again impact nickel mining operations in the island, threatening the world's fourth largest supplier. Nickel is a vital component in electric vehicle production, specifically for the batteries, and the impacts on the supplies there would result in the rise in cost of those, giving some pain to those who are looking for an electric vehicle. Let's go ahead and move on to the front lines. And things are a little bit disorderly here, but I tried my best to get them roughly in place. An open source intelligence researcher named Cyrus shows the ratio of Russian to Ukrainian tank losses. This is the graph from data from August of 2023. And it goes basically from August all the way to June of this year. The red bar is Russian tank losses. The yellow bar is Ukrainian tank losses. The blue line here, which you might be able to see, it's kind of hard to see. Let me go ahead and do this, and I'm going to just trace this for you. This blue line right here is the ratio of losses of tanks between the two sides. And if you look right here, the loss ratio in June of this year, meaning this month, is 5.2 to 1. That means that at this point in time, Russia is losing even more, by 5 times more tanks than Ukraine is. Now, Russia's currently on the offensive. They're going to lose more equipment, but the typical expectation is they should lose about 3-1, not 5-1. This shows that Ukraine is fighting well above their weight class here and showing Russia exactly how much fight is in this particular dog. There also have been reports of increasing Russian chemical weapon attacks on the battlefield. There's been 271 more uses of chemical weapons in May compared to April of this year. That's a significant increase. So basically adding about not quite a third more. But Russia's really towing some serious lines here. That's really concerning. Glide bombs have been a major component of Russia's operations, and one of the major problems that Ukraine has had to deal with, namely that they dropped these glide bombs from well outside that 100-kilometer range, that then have them glide in and impact targets in Ukraine. Now, a brief look at the deep state map here. They've only got one change for today. That is Krasnodarivka here. Teeny tiny change, not even a full block. Just the ends of some streets here. Maybe you got the other side of this little bit of road here. So you get a little bit of context here. Here's Krasnodarivka outside Donetsk. There were some other changes. Now, this one I have to put a caveat on. Robotna. Null Report states that there is geolocated footage showing Russian attacks northeast of Robotna towards a trench network held by Ukrainian forces. They are saying they're confident that Robotna is in the gray zone, that though mostly Russian controlled. So they believe Robotna has basically fallen once again. Wargonzo, on the other hand, states that there has not been a significant change in the Zaporizhia area, with just positional battles taking place in Robotna and northwest of Verbova. So I don't have a good analysis for it at this point, mainly because I don't have good information beyond what you're seeing here. My gut feel is that the forces that may be northeast of Robotna are most likely coming from the Verbova direction, but that does not mean that Robotna has not effectively fallen at this point in time. That said, there's not much left of Robotna once again. Chasiv Yar, the Russians continue to push, but they're barely moving the line. The situation in Kalinivka is unclear, but looks Ukrainian held after a recent counterattack. So these counterattacks are taking place in the places. Sorry, I missed it when I coughed. Thank you, everybody, for that. Backing up to Chasiv Yar, the Russians have been pushing in that area for a while now, but the front line's barely moving. They did make some small gains in the eastern microdistrict, but Null reports that Kalinivka is unclear, but perhaps Ukrainian held after a recent counterattack. And I was saying that even though it appears that these are opportunistic rather than necessarily coordinated counterattacks, the Ukrainians are taking what opportunities they can find to push the Russians back. And every little bit of property recaptured feels really nice for Ukraine. Northwest of Horlivka, Russian forces have started to push towards Pivniche through Shumi, which is now occupied. Ukrainian forces are also confirming the Russian advance. This was previously in the gray zone. And at Avdiivka, the Russian forces have managed to advance into Karlivka. The fighting has moved into the center of the village. Not good news for Ukraine. But the next major place where they would have a natural barrier of any sort is this river just to the west of town there. That would just kind of highlight, whoop, that's red, not blue. This river right here will be their next natural choke point, which they might be able to pick up. Volchansk, however, no major changes have been noted, but important information from the Ukrainian command. Russians are partially withdrawing units due to the fact that they lost combat capability because of heavy losses. They'll have to be replenished in this area. That means the Russians are on the back foot. They're getting pushed back out, not by necessarily the change of lines, but by the fact that their forces are being attrited. And Russian forces made minor advances east of Druzhba, and with some recon into the first streets thereof, but they were repelled there. Whew, that's a lot of stuff going on the front. You would think that they would have a nice quiet weekend or something, but nope, the weekends are very busy. Let's go ahead and move into the extras, though. There's some interesting stuff here. Did you know that Russia's centuries-long attempts to wipe out the Ukrainian language even went as far as making a certain Ukrainian letter illegal? The next time one of your friends tells you some nonsense about Russia invading Ukraine to protect the Russian speakers, here's some information for you. I thought, while the video is interesting, I'm going to link right here. Evening, Luciano. Glad to see you as well. The chart right here, titled 300 Years of Moscow Trying to Erase the Ukrainian Language and Culture, was, I thought, far more interesting. Starting with 1708, when 6,000 Ukrainian men, women, and children were murdered by Peter I, and a Ukrainian city burned to the ground. Lots of interesting little details right here, including mentioning the Holodomor and a few other major events. Really puts into perspective how long Russia has been trying to crush the Ukrainian spirit. So absolutely, that link there will get you to both that brief history and the video link, both of which are very good. The world's autocrats see weakness as an opportunity. Like Putin, Xi understands only strength and resolve. Putin took the West's collective complacency as an invitation to launch a brutal war against Ukraine. The next time Chinese warships gather around Taiwan and its fighter jets run simulations of attacks on the island, Europe must not make the same mistake by standing idly by. That's right. Once again, the autocrats have all been paying attention to the fact that the West has little appetite for war, and certainly little appetite to confront these things directly if they don't have to. This is an opinion piece by Anders Fogh Rasmussen, who's a former NATO Secretary General, talking about this situation. And again, I want to just go and share it with you. It's chock full of fun quotes. It takes about 5 minutes to read. Speaking of things that are really chock full of really interesting information, man, I've got so many links today. Ryan Macbeth had a nice interview with journalist Jason J. Smart of the Kyiv Post, talking about F-16s and what they can do, talking about their anti-radiation capabilities, their air-to-air capabilities, all the things that make this an interesting ad for Ukraine. Of course, he also addresses the fact that everything is called a game changer, and yet really you have to have a lot of game changers to actually change the game. Excellent interview. The long story short is that absolutely there's about 80 F-16 fighters that are pledged to Ukraine. Some of them are already either in country or immediately available. And overall, he does a very good summary of what F-16s can do for Ukraine and their effective capabilities. Now, he did talk about particularly wild weasel operations. And one of the things he particularly mentioned I found extremely fascinating was the idea that Western weapons have been degraded by Russian electronic warfare capabilities. But if you have an F-16 with an anti-radiation missile or harm, when they fire up the jamming signal that would jam the GPS, the HARM missile goes straight to where that jamming is and blows it up. So you start your attack by encouraging the enemy to turn on their electronic warfare, and pow, you drop a HARM on their head. That takes care of their electronic warfare capabilities, and now your munitions are back to their amazing GPS-guided accuracy. Yes, Ryan Macbeth is the Boy Scout we all wish to be one day. Now, I don't know if I'd call Ryan Macbeth a Boy Scout, but he's got a lot better analysis skills than I think the opposition gives him credit for. And he's a great communicator on top of that. You may see this picture circulating on the on Ukraine war channels. I'm going to summarize what happened and just say you do not need to pursue the video to see it, because it is disturbing. 3 Russian soldiers were moving in formation. A drone impacted. Now, there is some debate about whether the drone was Ukrainian or Russian, but there's also debate about whether they were going towards or away from Ukrainian lines. Some people are speculating they may have been preparing to surrender. But the drone came in, impacted the soldier, and he asked to be put out of his misery. His comrade didn't even hesitate. He picked up his rifle and just finished the deed, not even pausing for a moment. And this appears to be an increasing pattern on the part of the Russians. Now, he did ask to be put out of his misery. I'm being very, very careful how I'm phrasing this because YouTube would absolutely go ballistic if I use the real words. So you can take this in whatever way you wish. Just understand that things are brutal on those front lines. And some people are hardened by it. Some more than others. Kyiv Post puts up an analysis on how long will battlefield drones reign supreme. In fact, somebody declared the day of the tank is over because drones can take them out. Tanks are expensive, drones are cheap. And therefore, if you can take out a $10 million tank with a $500 drone, why, doggone it, the tank is therefore obsolete. And that is in some ways what is happening over in Ukraine. But I'm not so convinced. And the reason I'm not so convinced is because of what's called active protection systems. Active protection systems, once they're installed on a vehicle like a tank, could be easily used with very inexpensive ammunition compared to even the cost of a drone to intercept and stop attacks by drones. So now the numbers start making sense in the other way again. Tanks then become relevant once more because it's a big armored box. It stops small arms fire. It stops RPGs. It stops other things. And with an active protection system on top to stop the drones, why, it's even cheaper to stop the drones and keep your expensive piece of hardware on the battlefield to do what expensive hardware does best. Drones right now are a major part of the battlefield. They will always be a major part of the battlefield. But the idea of the death of the tank because of it, I think, as the French army chief states, their dominance will be short-lived as countermeasures develop. And we're going to end off with a couple of fun little pictures of animals here. Ukraine Security Services put up a picture of their operatives. But if you pay close attention, you see a cat in the photo. And they blurred the cat's face too. So that just I could not resist. Started laughing my head off, blurred all the operatives' faces and the cat. Absolutely wonderful. Of course, there are some personalities on the internet that would take this opportunity to have some fun with it. Somebody claimed it was this person named Islamacat, who is a humorous account that is cat related. He says, there is no truth to the rumor that this cat face has been blurred because it's me. What would Islamacat be doing with Ukrainian special forces? Well, maybe this is the link between what happened in Dagestan and what happened over in what's going on in Ukraine. I don't know, as only Islamacat would know. So that's everything for today. Thank you again so much for joining me. I'm glad you guys have made it here. It's been crazy over here for me lately, with work being getting me up to speed. I rolled in pretty darn tired today, and after a long day in the hot weather doing my work, and I just want to tell you that I'm still at it. I'm still beating on the information, doing my best to get it here for you as well. And on that note, thank you for joining me for it, because you guys are the ones that make all the difference. I could talk to this microphone all day long, but it would never mean nearly as much than getting to talk to you at the same time. So thank you for joining me. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.